The original standard was treason and bribery. That led Mason to object that it was too narrow. If bribery could include any time you did anything for personal interest instead of public interest, if you have this overarching definition, that exchange would have been completely useless. The framers didn't disagree with Mason's view that bribery was too narrow. What they disagreed with was when he suggested maladministration to add to the standard, because he wanted it to be broader. And what James Madison said is that that's too broad, that would essentially create what you might call a vote of no confidence in England. It would basically allow Congress to toss out a president that they did not like. But once again, we're all channeling the intent of the framers, and that's always a dangerous thing to do. The only more dangerous spot to stand in is between Congress and an impeachment as an academic. But I would offer instead the words of the framers themselves. You see, in that exchange, they didn't just say bribery was too narrow. They actually gave an example of bribery. And it was nothing like what was described. When the objection was made by Madison, ultimately the framers agreed. And then Morris, who was referred to earlier, did say we need to adopt this standard. But what was left out was what came afterwards. What Morris said is that we need to protect against bribery because we don't want anything like what happened with Louis XIV and Charles II. That is, the example he gave of bribery was accepting actual money as the head of state. So what had happened in that example that Morris gave as his example of bribery was that Louis XIV, who was a bit of a recidivist when it came to bribes, gave Charles II a huge amount of money, as well as other benefits, including apparently a French mistress, in exchange for the secret treaty of Dover of 1670. It also was in exchange for his converting to Catholicism. But that wasn't some broad notion of bribery. It was actually quite narrow. So I don't think that dog will hunt in the 18th century, and I don't think it'll hunt today. Because if you take a look at the 21st century, bribery is well defined. And you shouldn't just take our word for it. You should look to how it's defined by the United States Supreme Court. In a case called McDonald versus the United States, the Supreme Court looked at a public corruption bribery case. This was a case where gifts were actually received. Benefits were actually extended. There was completion. This was not some hypothetical of a crime that was not fulfilled or an action that was not actually taken. The Supreme Court unanimously overturned that conviction. Unanimously. And what they said was that you cannot take the bribery crime and use what they called a boundless interpretation. All the justices said that it's a dangerous thing to take a crime like bribery and apply a boundless interpretation. They rejected the notion, for example, that bribery could be used in terms of setting up meetings and other types of things that occur in the course of a public service career. So what I would caution the committee is that these crimes have meaning. It gives me no joy to disagree with my colleagues here. And I really don't have a dog in this fight. But you can't accuse a president of bribery. And then when some of us note that the Supreme Court has rejected your type of boundless interpretation, say, well, it's just impeachment. We really don't have to prove the elements. That's a favorite mantra that is sort of close enough for jazz. Well, this isn't improvisational jazz. Close enough is not good enough. If you're going to accuse a president of bribery, you need to make it stick, because you're trying to remove a duly elected president of the United States. Now, it's unfair to accuse someone of a crime, and when others say, well, those interpretations you're using to define the crime are not valid,